Hello everyone, welcome to the 606th episode of Constructed Criticism. I'm your host Mason, joined by nobody this week. Spencer and Abe are out taking care of some important family stuff and sort of had a guest kind of fall through near the last second. So instead of missing a week, I decided to do a short mini episode of something that I think is super important for lots of listeners. That is something that we don't talk enough about, but we have alluded to here on the show, and I think as a Magic community in general. And this all started for me kind of when to actually talk about tilt, right? And tilt's a term where you get very emotionally invested in something, and you start not thinking rationally or clearly, right? You start having an emotional response to something. We think about tilting a lot in Magic and in gaming in general, I think with rage, right? Oh, I'm so mad about this, and sort of the stereotypical yelling and screaming. But tilting manifests itself in lots of different ways, right? You can be tilted and be really sad and depressed, like, oh, I always won for the RC, or oh, for, oh, God. You know, you get really defeated. You have the person that simmers and just gets mad under the surface. And when kind of outlining what I wanted to talk about when it came to all this topic, I realized that, while tilt might be the thing that, we see, right, like a symptom, the disease I actually think is expectations, right? And that's why I'm sort of calling this episode, Your Expectations Are Ruining Your Events. And I've talked, about this some on the podcast in the past, on streams, on my own personal YouTube channel, things like this a little bit, but I really want to dig into this here for the podcast listener today, because I think this is so important going into RCDC and your local store champs and RCQs and so many things like that. So I want to stop really quickly here and let's do a little thought experiment together. I want you to think about what are your goals for RCDC if you're playing it, or maybe an RCQ this weekend, right? What are your goals? What are your expectations? I'm going to give you a second. I'm going to take a little drink. Think about it. Pause if you need to. Pause this episode. Think about that. Awesome. So, was your answer something like, I want to day 2 the RC. I want to have a positive record. I want to qualify for the Pro Tour. I want to, blah, 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 blah. I want to win my RCQ. I want to win the Oculus promo. I think lots of times these are goals and expectations that people set for themselves, right? I think these are bad things to have be our bar for success, right? Even the best players in the world miss, right? We talk about this a lot, but, Paulo Vitor Damarosa, who if you're a newer Magic player, you probably heard of him passing, weren't really there for when he was the most dominant player, but is historically, easily a top 5, probably top 3 player of all time. And Paulo Vitor Damarosa had a period of time where he sort of, I don't want to say fell off the sort of train when it came to Pro Tours, but was dangerously close to, And this was, due to a lot of things. We actually have an episode where he talks about that with Spencer, I believe, on the YouTube channel. It's a really good listen. But basically, just some things didn't break his way. Probably could have played a little better. Probably could have done a little bit better in deck selection. But ultimately, sometimes you just don't win, right? And that's, a very normal thing. More recently, Nathan Storer had a couple bad RCs, right? I don't believe he day 2'd RC Cincinnati a couple weeks ago, playing green-white 2 weeks after he won the Pro Tour. And I know a couple times he's missed day 2. I'm not saying that to like blast Nathan or something. I'm using it as an example of currently one of our best players missing day 2 of the RC. And having your goal be something like that, I think, is setting yourself up to get really hurt and to sort of potentially sewer yourself and misalign your goals and tilt you, right? Tilt is this thing that kind of expresses itself in this emotional outburst, or like we talked about before, defeatism, or, anger under the hood, and you're trying not to ruin the time for others, right? But when we get to the root cause, a lot of times it stems from not meeting our goals, right? Being mad at ourselves for making misplays, making mistakes. And these sort of things are very human, very natural, right? At any one time, you can underperform pretty easily, right? It's very easy to underperform in Magic. Magic's a game that asks a lot of you. It's a very hard game. I think as a community, we should probably acknowledge how hard it is a bit more. But either way, it's one of those spots where it's like very easy if you don't give your all to just, blow an event, right? And not have a very good result, not have a very good showing, and for, you to be below where you normally would land. Similarly, you can get a little luckier and end up, I think, pretty easily 6 match points higher than you would on average. I think that's not an unrealistic, sort of band for a player to hit. I think that number can even go higher, but I think 6, winning 2 more matches than you would if you maybe played the tournament 1,000 times makes a lot of sense. Sometimes your opponents get a little unlucky, or they don't try their best, or, you make a really risky all-in play and it pays off versus, your opponent doing the similar thing and it not paying off. So there's a lot of things that can happen in a Magic tournament, but tying our our goals and things based on results and things like that is not the best place to be, simply because it isn't what's going to help you improve in the long term. And once again, like we just talked about, it's not even that good of an indicator, right? When I first started playing Comp Magic and trying to get to the Pro Tour, I believe it was the first year, or maybe it was slightly over that, but basically I lost playing for the PT very early on. Would I have been a PT player if I had won that one more match? If my Death Shadow opponent hadn't turned 2'd me, basically, because quadruple Street Wraith Fetch Shock Shadow into, play another one, Thought Seize You, whatever, you're dead. And it's like, oh, okay, well, that's really hard to beat. If my opponent had done that, maybe they just had a non-functional hand. Maybe they kept 4 Street Wraiths, drew 0 lands. I qualify for the PT. I think it was Madrid. I go to Madrid. Am I a PT level player? I would argue I probably wasn't. Maybe I wouldn't have been self-aware enough at the time to realize that, right? That was 8 years ago, right? I would have been, 24, 25, depending on the time, very young still. I might have been really feeling myself. I put a lot of work in, but would I really been that? Similarly, am I a bad player if I missed day 2 of an RC? I missed day 2 of Cincy, 2 weeks ago. But I had a really great time. The games were really good. My opponents made a lot of great plays. I made some great plays. I feel really good about that. And I feel good about sort of, my preparation and everything that went into it. And I'm pretty happy with the event. I'm not satisfied. I want to improve more. But my expectations for the event were to play the best Magic I can, make my opponents earn their wins, right? And what I mean by that is I'm not giving up. I'm not being defeatist. I'm sort of going in, giving my all every single round, right? And how do I like my plans when it comes to sideboarding and approaches to matchups, How is my mulliganing, and how is my combat math? Those are kind of the 5 big things when it came to the event and playing. And I feel like I did a great job on most of those. I had moments where I probably could have mulled a bit better. Maybe I could have, attacked a bit better, right? But on the whole, I feel generally quite good about this, and I sort of succeeded at my goals. I played some good Magic, put my opponent in some tough spots, found some weird lines for lethal, set myself up for some weird lines for lethal. Some of my opponents played around those lines very well. Sometimes they got. What more is there to say? Like, that in my mind is what you should be having your goals like. Things that are in your control and are things that we can reflect on and gauge accordingly. It's so easy to look at match points and match wins as the indicator of good or bad. But, if you, just because you win one event, it is not going to change your life, right? It is kind of the culmination of everything. And it might feel great, and as someone who's won a couple big things, it does feel good and it is exciting, but it wasn't that one thing that changed my life, right? It's like a series of long events all stringing together, an improvement. And, just because I won DreamHack Dallas or whatever doesn't make me some, insane player or whatever. It is just sort of an accomplishment and a showing of, hey, I did so many of the right things. I put myself in a position to win, and I won. I won an SCG 10K right before MH3 launched, right? Playing kind of a weird mono black deck. Doesn't mean much. And you know what I mean? I played well. I put myself in a position to win. I did good things. I'm proud of that accomplishment. I have that trophy in the other room. I'm actually thinking about putting it over here now that I've rearranged my office a little bit for the future. But, it's not like that makes or breaks my life. That's just a moment of me putting my best self forward. And I feel better about, this event I played in Cincinnati where I went 4-4 than I do some other events, right? It's an RC I didn't even day 2. But I feel like I put my best self forward, my best footing forward. And if we played that event with that, and I think I played that much, focus and, intensity 100 times, I probably do qualify a fair number of them, 2 or 3 times, right? And I think that's something that you have to kind of logic in the back of your mind, that the most likely outcome when you go to an event is not to win, but it is to lose. that is the outcome that is expected because there can only be one winner. How much equity can any one person have? We talked about Nathan Sawyer playing Cincy at the beginning part of this episode. What was his percentage chance to realistically win, and I mean come in first place at the RC? I don't know. When I talk about winning for me at that event, it was like qualifying for the PT. For him, he already won the PT, a couple weeks prior. So I assume it's more of like the World's Hunt / love of the game. I don't really quite know the full details there. But I simply say this to say that, like, winning, even if you change your definition to qualifying for the PT, which is top 32, right? Maybe top 33, I would say, on average in the States. Often there's one pass down. But, if you set the bar at top 33, it's still so likely you're not going to make it. And what percentage do you actually have to make it there? This is why setting these things as your goals and the milestones, in my opinion, is setting yourself up for, a really hard time. It doesn't mean you can't succeed. It doesn't mean you won't make the Pro Tour. It doesn't mean you can't be one of the best Magic players of all time, or even just a great Magic player. But I think it is putting you on a harder route for it. And I think focusing on these things that we talked about here of like, how was my mulliganing? How was my attacking and blocking? What was my prep like? Did I mentally give up? Should I have mulliganed to 6? Should I have done this weird thing? Did I consider all my options when preparing for the event? What was my process like? Was I really focused on wins and losses in leagues and not on what matters? All of these, and when I say what matters in the game, all of these things I think are things that are much better metrics to gauge our success by, right? And success based on match wins, I think it's just sort of doomed to put you in a really negative headspace, right? And I think that's one of the easiest ways to really fail at Magic tournaments. I tell a lot of coaching clients that you get to lose 3 games in day 1, and sometimes even lose a 4th game in day 2 and still make the PT, right? It's not like other events. You play a local RCQ, you get 3 losses. That's game. Back it up. You're done. You get 3 losses at the RC. Okay, you're not in a great spot, but you're not dead. You can still qualify for the Pro Tour. So I say that to simply say, it's so important for you not to fixate on how am I doing? How others are perceiving me? Am I qualifying with the PT? Is this going to be another 04 event? Am I going to miss day 2 like I always do, right? Stuff like that, those narratives and those thoughts that pop up in your head, those are really the big, big enemy. And it's, winning matches is an important part of getting to the PT, but the way to win matches is to do all these other things correctly, right? And to not let tilt get to you, not be like, oh, I'm really due for this one, I'm supposed to win one of these events. And I think being really introspective and thinking about how did I do regardless of outcome is honestly the way you should be. And I'm going to cap this off really quickly with a story from a former coaching client and a friend of mine named Jay. Jay had an invite for RC Cincy, but did not have a second one for DC. So Jay decided they were going to play some LCQs. And I think in like the second or third one, I can't remember quite which, Jay makes the finals. I watched Jay play 2 of those games. I can't remember if they were the game 1 and 2 or if it was 2 and 3, but either way, I saw 2 back-to-back games. And then we all went out for dinner, and, at dinner, Jay asked me, how do you think I played those games? Right? What do you think? Blah, blah, blah. Now, you'll notice I didn't mention how Jay did, right? I just sort of told you when we got to dinner, Jay was reflecting on it. And Jay did win the match, Jay won the 2 games that I saw, and I was like, I thought your play was great, except for this one spot where I think it's really close, but I think I would have done this for XYZ. And then Jay and I talked about it, and Jay was like, sort of like, yeah, I thought about that, but I don't know, I kind of just, the opponent was man screwed, but yeah, you're right, I probably should have, and, said some reasoning, and I think that's a much better way to look at it, right? When we were done, Jay won the event. Jay now has that extra invite for RCDC coming up in just a couple days, right? But afterwards, Jay, this probably would have been like 30 to 40 minutes later, I would guess. It took us from to get to the hall to the sushi place. Maybe a little less than that. Either way, but Jay was reflecting on it still and wanted to think about how did that game go and how could I have played better? Even though Jay won. Jay 5-0'd the LCQ. Jay was saying, I feel good about my deck. So I just want to use that as an example because I think that, to me, really highlighted a great mental and a great thought process and a great way to approach the game, right? Jay approached it from, how could I be doing better, right? Did I play out to the best of my abilities? Even though I won, I'm reviewing my games in my head. And you know what? Mason's here. I should ask him, what does he think? And just because I won doesn't mean I did everything right, or that, I did a bunch of things wrong, right? Like, it just means I played this game and the outcome was I won. Somebody has to win the tournament. Somebody has to win your match of Magic, right? That is just how these things go. And reflecting on instead what outcomes are, and instead of focusing on outcomes and caring instead about how our decision making and everything else and our goal setting and all that kind of stuff, that's what's going to get you there, And Jay, I believe, has played one PT so far. Now that I'm saying that, I feel like it's two. Whatever. I think it's one. Final answer. But I think Jay's going to play a lot more. And what I've noticed, too, from just interacting with people is the people that have this approach that I'm talking about, they are the people who pretty consistently are the ones who make the Pro Tour. Not to say that people who don't do that can't make it. I've just found that, this group of play or this like mentality or mindset is one that is pretty consistent among Pro Tour players. Even in the Pro Tour feature match area, after Nathan Storr would finish some games, Nathan would talk to his opponent some, right? Nathan would say, even when he lost or won, like, whoa, that game was really weird, or I'm really not sure about this, and would talk to his opponents. It's a sign to me of a great player, someone who's a constant student of the game, and it sets, the bar for success based on what we can control and on things that are going to help us improve in the long term and not caring about match wins. It feels great to win tournaments, like even like little things, relatively can be really fun. I won my first One Piece locals this past weekend. I've been learning the game. It was awesome to win that, silly little tournament. I've won tournaments that are like 10, probably 100 times as big as that one, and bigger. And it's like, but I still felt great. And it feels cool to like have all the hard work I've been putting in and time studying and learning about the game and learning about theory and learning about my opponent's decks and learning about my deck. That felt great. But, my expectations are that I'm just going to do the best I can, etc. And even when I got done finished playing against that, I played against a really strong local player in the last round. And I was like, I really want to talk to you about this game afterwards, because I think there are a lot of decisions here where I'm doing some things that feel right, but I could totally see them being wrong because I'm still so new to the game. And I feel like I am missing some piece of the puzzle. I can kind of tell because, I've done so much reflection on other games before, So I simply said to say it's not a bad thing to want to do well. It's not a bad thing to want to play the PT. I just think you're going to get there a lot easier and I think you're gonna be a lot happier along the way as well if you instead focus on the process of improving as a player. So I really challenge you, going into RCDC, going into your RCQs, going into your store champs this weekend, going into your FNM, set your expectations at something like gonna mulligan well, not gonna keep risky hands. I'm gonna really work on my sideboard planning. I'm really gonna think about what my opponent's actions are telling me. I'm really gonna double check my combat. Could I be attacking a turn sooner? All of these sort of things. These are the kind of stuff I really, really, really think you should focus on. That's going to do it for our main topic here today on the episode. Hopefully you all like this. I know I've talked about this kind of thing in other settings before, but it's something I'm really passionate about and I think is super, super important. And heading into the RC weekend, I really kind of want to talk about it again. Please don't let your expectations be the thing that ruins your results and lets you tilt out and crash out and be upset. Please, please, please be an eternal student of the game. If you want to support the show, you go to patreon.com/ccmtg. The show will always be free, but patrons get to ask questions like Adrian did here. Adrian said, what process would you give someone who just qualified for the June standard qualifier, who is mostly a limited player and starting to learn standard? So first, congratulations on qualifying. And, I picked this question because of this topic, right? So I think some great sort of goals are first is sit down and think about what you're wanting, right? Do you want to be committing more time to standard? Do you want to be, is this like a thing where you kind of got into this spot and you're like, heck, I'm going to give it the best chance I can? How much time do you have to prepare for this sort of thing? Two is a big matter, right? Did you just start a new job and you're working a ton and trying to learn that? Well, this might be a little less of a thing. Are you kind of, in the thick of things and a pattern and routine and you have a lot of, mental bandwidth to give this? Well, that's going to change my answer too. But I think two really good things, because I also know you, Adrian, that I would set for you to, kind of be your process is one, really understand what the selling points and what the drawbacks are for each of the big standard decks, right? So a good example of this is Selesnya Landfall. This is a deck that is a very powerful, proactive combo deck that can just kind of burst through your opponent and put your opponent to the test. Inversely, though, even though you do have 6 interactive spells in your main deck, you do struggle with things that go way over the top of you. You struggle to, have a good stack-based interaction, and you aren't the most malleable deck. You are pretty rigid, right? And this is sort of a short version of it. So I really think, learn that for the decks and make your deck selection process based on that sort of thing, because I think learning that process and getting a good understanding of all the decks will put you in a pretty good spot for the event, but also be a good habit to kind of get into for the future when it comes to deck selection process. That's typically how I try to select my decks, is thinking out what are the pros and the cons, because there are always pros and cons to decks, and sort of go about it from there. And when there aren't cons, that's when you're in Nadu situation. So the second one I would give you, at least personally, and you can pick whatever you want, obviously, is I would really try to make sure you have good sideboard plans picked out for whatever deck you play, right? And what I mean by good sideboard plans is maybe you didn't figure out the perfect plan for the matchup, but you put some time in, you really thought about what matters, you iterate it, you test, right? And then we reflect after the event as well, right? Oh, maybe I really thought this card was going to be great, let's say Soul Guide Lantern, but in practice, actually, it wasn't that good. Or I overestimated how impactful it was. Or these decks changed and they no longer were heavy on, Eddie Merc Crab, etc., and became much more, what's it called, colored stallion decks. And I didn't adjust my sideboarding accordingly. Or, even more niches, like, yep, against the crab version that was good, but I sort of just copy pasted and didn't think too much about what happens if they change their build. Those would be two big things to give you sort of, a more quote unquote normal process, right? And to think about things is, I would say just you have a lot of RC data, right? You're gonna have DC from this weekend. I think the European RC is before this as well. Maybe it already happened. These last couple weeks have been a blur for me. So actually, now that I'm saying, I think the European RC will have happened by then as well. I think it's actually this weekend. Time is an illusion. Anyways, you're gonna have a bunch of data. Go look at that. Pick the deck that you think is gonna leverage your skills the best, and once you've kind of gone through that process, and the one that you think makes the most sense for everything at large, and just play the best that you can and put your best foot forward. That's all anyone can really ask of you. And you're in the Patreon Discord as well, right, Adrian? So one of the benefits of that is you can ask other people what they think. Come to the best conclusion you can, right? Just because someone thinks something, and they believe it strongly, doesn't mean you have to follow it. But it is good to get an idea on how lots of other people are thinking about this stuff, and that's one of the benefits of being a patron. So anyways, hopefully that was helpful for you, Adrian. Feel free to DM me in the Discord, in the replies about Patreon questions. If you have any more, I'm happy to go and talk about that with you. As for the show at large, though, I'm going to wrap it up here. Not going to really do an always improving segment today, because even though it's the main point of the show, it feels a little weird just talking about myself. And honestly, what I would have talked to you about anyways was that story about, the locals and putting in the work and then ending up winning, for the One Piece game. And I just would have told you a very similar version of what we just talked about for the last 20 minutes when it comes to expectations, and how, my expectations are not to win those events. My expectation is to try to learn a bunch, try to, apply what my understanding and theories and knowledge of are for the game, and then do my best to execute on those in the tournament. So anyways, I guess I kind of did a mini version of it, but without going into too many more details. If you want to follow the show, you can at Constructive Criticism everywhere. You can check out our sponsors, Untapped.gg, link in the description, and Mana Traders using code CCMTG. I believe it should be 15 by the time you all hear this. I'm not exactly sure where we are in May, if I'm being 100% honest, but I know we're in the last couple days. If not, it'll be 14. But all that should be in the description for the show, so you can pull that up. Mana Traders is one of the best ways to play Magic the Gathering online. You can rent cards and play any sort of deck you want. You'll be seeing a lot of me in the Modern Streets. I have been playing a ton of the Cascade decks. So much Rhino, so much Living End, so much learning going on over these last couple days. It's been so much fun to really sink my teeth into Living End, a deck that's kind of passed me by in the past. So I'm really excited to play more of that. And without sites like Mana Traders, it would be so much harder to play and learn the format. So if you're someone really trying to commit and learn a format, check out Mana Traders and use our code to get a discount on your first 2 months. You can follow me on Twitter at Mason E. Clark. You can follow me at twitch.tv/TheMasonClark. I'd like to stream more. There was a whole thing where I didn't have my Twitch account for a bit, and it's a whole thing, but I have my account back now. I'm in it. I've just been actually having a lot of fun hanging in Discord with my friends and playing Magic, and sort of playing Living End and joking about, like, here's a couple 4/4 flyers, beat me, bro. Like really just having a lot of fun. But I do want to try to get back to that and make that happen. So that's something you can maybe keep an eye out on. I feel a little weird highlighting it so much, especially when I didn't have it, but it is, in theory, a great way to get a hold of me. And if you want to get a hold of me for coaching and all that sort of stuff, you can on Twitter, once again, at Mason E. Clark, or my email, masoneclark@gmail.com. Put coaching in the description. I mention this a lot every time we hit RC season. I'm going to have a little bit of a lull. I'm going to have some openings coming up because some clients are going to take a couple weeks off, and this is a great time to get started. And if you're already qualified for your next RC, we're thinking about getting coaching specifically for the RC, the best way to improve on long-term stuff and the things that are going to matter the most to you as a player for maximum improvement long-term, we should start now on and start to tackle it. Even if you only get a couple sessions, right? I think it's better for you to get those sessions than it is for you to get 1 or 2 sessions heading in to the RC proper, because you're gonna have so much less time to work on, to iterate on your skills, right? You probably have something you need to kind of tackle, and it's so much easier if we have 2 or 3 months of lead time heading into the event instead of 1 month of lead time to work on something like mulliganing, like combat math, like macro, like figuring out how to sideboard. That's a very common thing, is not even knowing how to make these guides that we kind of talk about in passing here. So go through all that kind of stuff in coaching. Feel free to reach out. I can give you the full breakdown. We can figure out if it's right for you. We will see you all next week for another episode of CCMTG.
Magic, magic, magic.